How's it going, everyone? My name is George, and today we're going to continue our Spider-Man series of reviews with Spider-Man Homecoming, directed by John Watts and starring Tom Holland as Spider-Man. Now, this is his first solo movie, his second appearance in the MCU. He did appear in Captain America Civil War, being recruited by Tony Stark, played by Robert Downey Jr., to take down Team Captain America at the airport. And in this film, we see Peter Parker trying to balance being Spider-Man and being a high schooler. He wants to prove to Tony Stark that he's ready to join the Avengers, or at least take on some more Avengers-level missions. And while this is happening, the Vulture, played by Michael Keaton, is selling illegal weapons made from T'Chari technology and technology from other Avenger-related events. So I was a huge fan of what Tom Holland did in Captain America Civil War, and I'm glad to see he carries on that great performance in Homecoming. I think he did a good job of carrying this film, and it's good to see a new take on Spider-Man. It felt like the Amazing Spider-Man movies, while they tried doing something different, it didn't quite land as well as I hoped it did at times, and it felt like the movies were becoming a little too similar, where here we're getting a new take. We're seeing some new characters or newer versions of the characters. We're seeing MCU elements being incorporated into this film. You got Captain America, played by Chris Evans, making these hilarious PSA videos. And we're seeing like a high school life being captured well in a Spider-Man movie. It feels like we never really, like, we've seen high school in The Amazing Spider-Man, but I feel like it's captured the best in Homecoming. Now, Tom Holland did a great job as Peter Parker and Spider-Man, but easily my favorite performance in this film was Michael Keaton as Adrian Toomes, aka the Vulture. And Michael Keaton's one of my favorite actors. I love him in Beetlejuice. I love him in Batman. He was great in more recent movies, such as Birdman and Spotlight, and he's continuing that trend of great performances in the last 10 years in Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, I was never the biggest Vulture fan. I respected him more than I respected Sandman, but Keaton really does a great job of making Vulture not just one of the better Spider-Man movie villains, still not as good as Green Goblin and Doc Ock, but at the time this movie came out, the third best villain, but also one of the best MCU villains. Now, we gotta remember, even though this is a Spider-Man movie, it's also an MCU movie. And the thing is, when it comes to the MCU, is their villains can be great, and then they can be mediocre. But Vulture's one of the best in the MCU. He's got clear motivations. You understand why he's doing the things that he does. Michael Keaton's talent is not being wasted at all. And really, as far as the villains that have come out in Spider-Man movies post Raimi films, the Vulture I feel would fit the best in the Raimi universe, because he's got clear motivations that we can understand, that we can feel a little sympathetic towards. At the beginning of the movie, he's, after putting all this money into his Savage company, the government shuts it down, and he does this weapon trafficking, selling weapons to get money to provide for his family and for his employees to also provide for their family. So even though it doesn't justify what he's doing, you understand why he's doing it. And it just reminds me of something in a Raimi Spider-Man film. But yeah, Keaton did a great job. I like the supporting cast in Zendaya and Jacob Batalon. Zendaya provides a lot of that blunt humor, like the thing about the Jefferson Monument. Ned Leeds provides being the guy in the chair. It's interesting to have a friend of Spider-Man's find out his identity. I wish they didn't show it in the trailers, though. Like, right away they show that Ned finds out that he's Spider-Man in the trailers. And it's like, that should have been a surprise in the movie, because we never really got that, where the best friend of Peter Parker's, that's not angry for vengeance, that is not a love interest, find out he's Spider-Man. And I enjoyed Ned. I thought he provided some of the best comedic relief as well. And I will say, before I get into more of the performances, the humor in Spider-Man Homecoming, compared to most MCU movies, I feel holds up the best. Now, Marvel has a lot of humor in its movies, and sometimes it gets flack for it. Sometimes the jokes hold up well, sometimes they don't. I think Homecoming is one of those movies where it still holds up after several viewings. Now, back to the performances. You have Robert Downey Jr. back as Tony Stark, aka Iron Man. And I love Iron Man. I love Robert Downey Jr.'s performance. But I'm glad they didn't rely heavily on him. I remember when this film was coming out, when the trailers were coming out in late 2016, 2017, before the movie came out, they relied heavily on having Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark in this film. It was like Sony wanted to reassure people that this is an MCU movie. We got Robert Downey Jr., we got Iron Man. And it was kind of worrying because you don't want Iron Man 4 in a Spider-Man movie. You want a Spider-Man movie. But luckily he's not in the movie as much as I love this character and love this performance. And he's kind of a mentor that he cares for Peter, but also at a certain point has to show him tough love when he's not listening to Peter about what's going on, and Peter messes up with the ferry incident. He has to basically guilt Peter by saying someone could have died and that would have been on you, and if you died that would have been on me, and even takes away the suit. And that's another thing I didn't like what the trailers did. Why show something like that in the movie? Just show the conflict and differences between Peter and Tony. You don't need to show the suit being taken away. You got Jon Favreau as Happy Hogan in the movie, who gets easily annoyed by Peter Parker. And then you have Marissa Tomei as Aunt May. And I know she gets a lot of flack for her performance as Aunt May. And I'll be honest, out of the 3 live-action Aunt Mays, she is probably third. Rosemary Harris and Sally Field, I think, have done a better job so far. But despite the jokes about how attractive Aunt May is in this film, I still think Marissa Tomei does a very good job. She still provides that care and helpfulness to Peter Parker, whether it's comforting him after the ferry incident, where he kind of lies and says he lost the Stark internship, which is half true, half false, and she comforts him, and she shows how worried she is about how he's focusing so much time on this Stark internship and not enjoying teenage life like she thinks he should. And we see her helping him get ready for Homecoming. So she still provides that care and guidance to Peter Parker, just in a different way compared to what Rosemary Harris and Sally Field did. Now, this is one of the more lighthearted Marvel Cinematic Universe films and Spider-Man movies. There's no, consequential deaths in this film. I mean, outside of maybe the first Shocker getting killed accidentally. But other than that, this film isn't as dark as the other Spider-Man movies. And while that can be a good thing at times, because not every Spider-Man movie you have to have somebody die. You don't need to have a loved one get killed or the villain get killed. But at the same time, it kind of holds the film back in some regards. For example, the action's fine in this movie, but it definitely feels like the lightest action of the Spider-Man movies. And I get it. This version of Peter Parker is younger. He's 15. He's a sophomore. He got bit earlier than Tobey and Andrew's versions. But this is the 6th live-action Spider-Man movie, even though it's the first in a new series. Sometimes, while less can be a good thing, it also kind of takes away from the film. And sometimes our expectations grow as we get more and more Spider-Man movies. So some people who want more action are going to feel a little more disappointed. Another thing is the final fight is probably my least favorite in a Spider-Man movie. It's fine. I don't dislike it. But it felt underwhelming to me. And the stakes at times did not feel that high. And with this being the 6th Spider-Man movie and having the lowest stakes, even though this is the first in a new series, kind of hurts the film a little bit, in my opinion. And I get it. Like I said, this is his earlier years. Obviously, as the films progress, the things are going to get harder. But it just felt like had like Spider-Man not stopped Vulture, eventually someone would stop Vulture. Whereas later on, like in let's say Far From Home, no one would have stopped Mysterio. And I'm going to get into Far From Home in when I review Far From Home. But yeah, I feel like the way the action was handled could use some work, and I think the stakes, like, they weren't presented to be as high as they should have. I felt like they could have done a better job with that. Having said that, though, I still like this movie a lot. Maybe not as much as I did when it first came out. I remember when it first came out in 2017, I thought it was the second best Spider-Man movie. In my opinion, has kind of gone down a little bit. But I still think it's a very good movie. I get some of the criticisms that he's Iron Boy Jr., he's Spider Boy. But in reality, I feel like the way they're capturing this version of Spider-Man being younger, like, here's the thing, having a mentor like Tony Stark, Spider-Man's always had mentors in the movies. The difference is, in those previous movies, his mentors were bad guys. Green Goblin, like Norman Osborn, was playing father figure to him after Uncle Ben died. He turned out to be Green Goblin and got impaled by his own glider. Otto Octavius was Spider-Man's science hero in Spider-Man 2. They had a great relationship before the experiment went wrong and Doc Ock went bad. The Amazing Spider-Man, you have the Lizard, Dr. Kirk Connors, who actually knew Peter Parker's dad, who was another science mentor to him, becomes the Lizard. So Tony Stark is essentially not the first mentor Peter Parker had in a movie. It's just the first mentor that didn't turn out to be a bad guy. So, like, I don't mind the fact that he's mentoring him, especially because in the Ultimate Comics, like, he would sometimes play mentor to him. So, I don't really consider Spider-Man to be Iron Boy Jr. or, like, Spider-Boy. It's more like a kid that's trying to find his place in a world with other superheroes. You gotta remember, not only were Tobey and Andrew's versions of Spider-Man older when they got bit by the spider, as far as we know, they're the only heroes in their world. So, like, they really gotta go about this on their own. Whereas, like, Spider-Man, here, he's trying to figure out how can he be a different kind of hero. Should he be like Iron Man, or should he be his own kind of hero? Now, another thing in this film that I know some people will criticize is Uncle Ben's not directly mentioned. He's referenced, though, without mentioning his name. When Ned finds out that Peter is Spider-Man, he opens up about why he can't tell Aunt May, because after all Aunt May's been through, and that's obviously hinting at Uncle Ben's death and how it impacted her, he doesn't want her to worry. Because Aunt May does worry in this film. Because Peter, like, does run off. I mean, he got in trouble for wandering off during the Washington trip and got detention. So, and eventually at the end of this movie, Aunt May does find out and almost drops an F-bomb. And we'll get into more about that in Far From Home with how Aunt May handles Spider-Man's identity. But all in all, I still like this movie a lot. And the mid-credits scene where you see Mark Gargan, played by Michael Mando, I remember thinking when the third Spider-Man movie was announced before this multiverse craziness came up that they were going to set up Scorpion because he wants to know Spider-Man's identity. And Adrian Toomes, out of respect for Peter, because Peter did save his daughter, chooses not to reveal it. But obviously, as we get into Far From Home, we find out his identity is revealed. And that would have been the perfect moment to incorporate Scorpion into the film. Obviously, that doesn't look to be the case. Maybe a Spider-Man 4, we can see Michael Mando play a Scorpion, because it's really Scorpion and Kraven that are next to be live-action villains in a Spider-Man movie. Now, I know we're getting a Kraven the Hunter film, so maybe Scorpion will be next. And actually, before I end this review, I do want to say, like, the brilliance of us finding out about Vulture. So Spider-Man goes to Homecoming with Vulture's daughter Liz. He's got a crush on Liz, and Liz likes him back. And when he goes to Liz's house for Homecoming, who's there but Adrian Toomes? And at first, the audience thinks that, is he holding this family hostage? But then you find out he's Liz's dad, and just how uncomfortable and tense Peter feels is just well captured in Tom's performance. And then the car scene as he's driving Peter and Liz to Homecoming, and he's slowly realizing that Peter is Spider-Man, and just how tense the car scene feels, to me, is some of the best work in the MCU. And I just love the line delivery from Michael Keaton, where he's like, good old Spider-Man. And it's like, is he gonna break into Beetlejuice right now? Like, that smile and the way he's saying it. Like, Michael Keaton did a great job in this movie. And yeah, I still like this movie a lot, even though it has kind of gone down a little bit in the last few years. But it's a nice high school superhero film that's telling a refreshing story about Spider-Man. And speaking of high school, it does reference, or kind of feels similar to some of the John Hughes movies like The Breakfast Club and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. They even have like a reference, like when Spider-Man's swinging or jumping through these backyards, they're having a watch party at Ferris Bueller's Day Off. He's like, cool movie. So yeah, I really like that they have that John Hughes influence in there as well. But yeah, great villain, very good supporting cast. The action could use a lot of work though, and the final battle could have been better. And like I said, they could have done a little bit better making the stakes as high as they probably should have been. I mean, selling illegal weapons is a big thing, because it just doesn't impact New York City. It's going to impact the entire country and possibly the world if those weapons go into more places. But yeah, I'm going to give Spider-Man Homecoming a B+. I think it's a very good movie, and I think people should re-examine this movie. It's funny, we've come to a point where you either gotta love a movie or you gotta hate a movie. You can't say, no, the movie's very good. It's not the greatest thing ever, but it's a very good movie. And I've kind of seen that with movies like Homecoming, where it's like, oh, this isn't my version of Spider-Man. Fail. It's like, look, you don't have to like the movie, but I wouldn't say it's the worst movie ever at the same time. I get it, we all have our version of Spider-Man we prefer. I love all three. Tobey's my favorite. Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2 are my top 3 movies. But hey, I can still like this movie. And I can't wait to talk about Far From Home in a couple days. But yeah, Spider-Man Homecoming. What did you guys think about it? Comment below and let me know. And I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe already if you haven't. Please share us with someone that loves Spider-Man, especially Spider-Man in the MCU. And I've been enjoying talking about these movies, I will say. And obviously, when 2022 comes around, I think I'm going to be talking about more older movies as well, because I like going more in depth with movies that you can spoil. Like, I'm still going to talk about newer movies, but with older movies, I can go more in depth with the reviews. So, I want to thank you guys for watching these Spider-Man reviews, and I hope to see you guys real soon. Take care, everyone.